Thank you. Welcome to this meeting of the Low Gardens Trust. As chair, I shall hand over to Councillor Bull for the first item.
Thank you. First item is the election of the chair. Oh, do you want me to read the... Sorry, I shall read what it says. Please note that the meeting of the Lower Central Gardens Trust Board is being live streamed and will be recorded by the council to support the production of the minutes for the use of democratic services. In order to ensure the meeting is managed effectively, please, could everyone present please follow these ground rules for speaking. Only speak when invited to do so by the chair. Mute your microphone when you are not talking. I will now ask each participant to introduce themselves and state their role. Councillor Williams.
Councillor Lawrence Williams, and currently the chair of the Low Gardens Trust.
Councillor Bartlett.
Councillor Bartlett, member for Regular Northbourne Ward. Thank you.
Councillor Slade.
Councillor Vicky Slade, member of the board.
Myself, I'm vice chair, as a member of the board. And can I ask, what about our independent advisors? They're not on this. Can I ask you just to go left to right and introduce yourselves, please?
Hi, Roger Boone. I'm not a councillor, I'm a co-opted member of the board.
So hello, I'm Andy McDonald, I'm the head of Parks and Bereavement Services.
I'm John Weaver, I'm the head of Destination and Events.
Hi, Ian Pompney, I'm head of Strategic Development for Environment.
Thank you, everyone. Election of the chair. Can I please take any nominations for chair?
I nominate Councillor Williams, please, if he's happy to accept the nomination.
Is there a seconder?
I'll have to second that.
Thank you. So, is there any, do we need a vote or can we just do it by consensus? Are there any objections to Councillor Williams remaining chair? Thank you. In that case, I will hand back the meeting to Councillor Williams.
Thank you, and I'll have the piece of paper that goes with it. Thanks. Thank you. That takes us to item 2, which is the election of vice chair. I would nominate Councillor Bull for the role, if he so wishes. And do I have a seconder?
I have a second.
Thank you, Councillor. All those in favour? That's carried. Thank you. Democratic Services, we have Nikki online. Nikki, do we have any apologies?
Thank you, Chair. Apologies received from Councillor.
Thank you. And are there any declarations of interest? Yes, thank you, Councillor Bartlett.
Yeah, potentially. I am a director at BH Live, which of course does pick up at the pavilion, which I think falls within this area. Thank you.
Quite right. Thank you. Can we have confirmation of the minutes of the last meeting, which was held almost a year ago on the 20th of December 2022, and a subsequent meeting on the 12th of January 2022? Those that attended, and I suspect that's just you, Councillor Bull, and myself, are you happy that we acknowledge those meetings? Minutes, rather? Thank you, I am too. So that brings us to the Lower Central Gardens Trust Board main meeting, or at least the bulk of the meeting. And who would like to present this report? Anybody? Or do we just take it as read and move on?
I believe that Kate Langdown is the lead officer.
Okay.
Kate, do you want to introduce?
Kate, are you online and would you like to present the report?
Apologies, a signal issue on my end. Yes, I have two lead officers in the room with you, Ian Pulteney and Andy MacDonald, who will take you through.
Okay, so over to, let's pick Andy first, shall we? Andy, would you like to kick off? Yeah, microphone.
I'm used to that now. So the trust board meeting there was a couple of recommendations in it. One is the trustees support and approve the following: reaffirming the terms of reference for the trust, reaffirming a delegation of day-to-day and business as usual activities to the Director of Environment and the Director of Direct Destination and Culture, and any major changes or new activities are to be referred to the trust board as we have done in the past. The implementation of the Lower Gardens events policy, which I thought John can outline, allow street food corner licences to be signed by the head of parks and bereavement services on behalf of the trust, and the trustees indicate which matters they require to be on the board plan for the Lower Gardens Central Gardens Trust, and the scope of any formal report from BCP council officers. That's the outline, Rachel, in their report. I don't know if you want me to go through it in detail.
I think so, yes, please.
So, yeah, I'm not too sure where you want to start.
Well,
I think
beginning
Tanya was
good
going to do an element of it on the. Tanya was going to do a bit on the delegation of authority first.
Okay, so yes, okay, let's start with the governance. And Tanya, if you wouldn't mind.
Thank you, Chairman.
Come on, thank you.
Yeah, what I've been asked to do, and I hope it's okay with you and the board members, is just go through a very short presentation, just setting out really what the charity is, what the role of the trust board is, and future issues for discussion, which then hopefully will then flow on to some of the items in the report and your future work. So, if I hope that's okay with you, Chair.
Yes,
I just do. I've only got about 6 slides, I think, and I will run through them very quickly. So, unless you've got questions, and hopefully they'll then help inform.
We'll take the questions when you've finished doing the presentation.
Thank you.
All right, thanks.
So I will just attempt to share my screen now. Okay. It's not working. So can you see my screen at the moment?
No.
If I do that, can you see it?
No, we've got a big Kate Langston picture on there, but
worked earlier.
You're not on there either. Actually, it's just an icon. Is your video on?
Apologies. Yep, everything is on, and I'm sharing.
Obviously an error in then.
That is that working?
No.
It's up on mine, Tanya.
Yeah, that's it. Yep, you're on now.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you very much. So very, very briefly, obviously the Lower Central Gardens Trust, Lower Central Gardens is a charity. It's the object, and the objects of the charity are set out in the Charity Commission scheme, which was made in 2011, and I can come on to the rationale for that and some of the background if there are questions around it. But basically, the object of the charity and what you have to have in mind whenever you're making decisions, as we'll see, is the appropriation and use of the charity's land for public gardens, for the use of the inhabitants of Bournemouth and the vicinity. And it goes on to refer to a building to be used as a public building for various purposes. Now that initially raised some alarm as to whether that was actually the town hall building. It isn't. We think that is the original purpose of the charity was to potentially include that building, but it doesn't appear to have ever been fulfilled. So, in essence, the object of the charity is to ensure that the land incorporated within the Lower Central Gardens Trust is used for public gardens for the inhabitants of Bournemouth and the surrounding area.
Can I just, I'm sorry, I did say we'd wait till the end, but
Go ahead.
talking about buildings, would that not be the pavilion?
We'll come on to that. Yes,
Okay.
potentially. we'll come on to the sort of broader scope in a minute. So just very briefly, the powers of the trustee. I'll come on to who the trustee is in a minute. The powers of the trustee are also set out in the 2011 scheme, and they are to exercise certain powers to further the objects. So the trustee can build buildings or structures as necessary, but only for the use of beneficiaries enjoying the charity's land as public gardens. So they've got to be necessary or desirable for that overarching purpose. And also you have powers to let or permit to be used, various buildings and land, so long as they are used for that purpose as well, that core purpose. The trustee has powers to let or permit to be let, and there are some limitations around the length of any lease and the powers relating to that, but you can enter into transactions as a charity to let part of the property or to license concessions and those sorts of things. And you're also empowered to make rules and regulations consistent with the scheme to manage the charity. So that's the very, very general powers of the trustee under the 2011 scheme. And I should say that 2011 scheme was agreed by made by the Charity Commission in 2011 and adopted by the council and approved by cabinet at the time. And that, in effect, is the founding document now. It's the new trust deed for the charity. So it does reflect and it refers to the old indenture and it refers to the Bournemouth Borough Council Act. But fundamentally, if you read through the rules and you look at that charity scheme, that will give you what you need to know and it will set out your powers. Now, you are not individual trustees, although you're board members. The trustee is the council and the council is the sole trustee of the charity and it acts through cabinet. So cabinet is the governing committee, as you were, within the council under the scheme. And the arrangements approved in 2011 under the rules are that then Cabinet's powers are in effect exercised through the establishment of a trust board, the Lower Central Gardens Trust Board. So the means by which board members are appointed are also set out in the detailed rules. So the councillor appointments are appointed through the exercise of the political balance, so to reflect the political balance of the council. And external independent members are also appointed, up to 3. And that is intended to assist with managing conflicts of interest and to provide that independent input and oversight, to hopefully deal with conflicts and to flag up issues and avoid any perception or actual conflicts of interest and bias occurring that may well occur if it was purely a councillor-run committee. So the role of your board, your role is to administer and manage the charity and its property in accordance with the rules and subject to the terms of the 2011 scheme. You are officially or technically a subcommittee of cabinet, and cabinet does have the power to reassert and reassume control, although unless it was very clear as to its rationale for doing that, I think questions would be asked by the Charity Commission as to why it was doing that, because obviously it would undermine some of the independence that the board has, and it would potentially raise some concerns. But technically, cabinet does have the power to reassert and take control of the management of the charity. The board can delegate powers to officers, and decisions taken by officers should then be reported back to the trust board. And that can be done by way of an agreement of a business plan initially, and various objectives being set. So you would oversee the strategic planning and the business plans, review the rules and the policies. You may reserve certain powers to you about property transactions and major decisions, and there might be financial limits that you would set. So very much like a cabinet would do, or a council committee would do, you would have that strategic oversight and then obtain reports as to decisions that are made and how things are going from the officers who would be exercising delegated powers. The officers who are making those decisions would also be acting with a trustee hat on, so would have to be mindful of the purposes of the trust rather than the council. And I think the most important point really is that the rules refer to each of you as board members being under an overriding duty to act in the best interests of the charity, as opposed to the interests of any other body that you might be a member of or the council. So we'll come on to conflicts of interest in a minute, but I think that is that's the core theme running through the rules and the governing documents. So the conflicts of interest policy was also agreed in 2011, and rules are provided for declaration of personal interests, for dealing with conflicts, with detailed guidance on dealing with various scenarios. And I think one of the key statements I think that's in the conflict of interest policy is that where there is a potential conflict that might affect you as a board member and you're also a councillor, that priority should be given to the trust board and you should withdraw from the council decision. So that's how the rules have been drafted, and that's what the conflict of interest policy states. So if there were a potential conflict and a matter was going to cabinet or to another decision-making body within council that you were a member of, what they're saying is that you should be putting the priority towards the trust board, making that decision in the interest of the trust, and then withdrawing from any decision that you might normally be a party to within the council governance framework. So I think some of the issues that arise, I think, around the decision making, really for you to think about, I think, is how you delegate to officers and how that scheme is set out, and that would be dealt with in the report. And then the officers can answer some questions as to what the current scheme and how that's set. How meetings are managed, how many meetings you have. I think that the view is that there are 3 a year, and then there are some informal meetings as well, which are useful for you to get an update that's more informal and understand the decisions that officers are making on a day-to-day basis. There is a sort of rather glitchy overlap, I think it's fair to say, between charity law and local government law. And one of the ways that interplays in not a very helpful way is this distinction between voting members and non-voting members. So as councillors on the committee, a subcommittee of cabinet, you have a vote that sort of counts legally to bind the council and the trust. And as an independent member, although you have a vote and that should be recorded under the rules, it's not counted sort of within local government law as binding, sort of binding, able to bind the council and the trust. So you're in there is a tension there, and I think one of the issues, or the ways it's been resolved historically, is that vote's been recorded, and that as councillor trust board members, you should be taking note of what the independent members are saying and be wary and very conscious of having an independent member and councillor split, because that would lead to a perception of potentially putting the interests of the council before the trust. And that's the way the Charity Commission sort of saw it, I think, when they were looking at having independent members involved. So it is difficult, and there is that tension, and that has to be dealt with and managed within the committee meeting. There is a potential tension between how one would normally deal with confidential papers, maybe as a charity and as a board. I think there is appears to be less regulation around it, and it's much easier to withhold information and to see financial information as confidential to that charity. And I've seen that sort of in charity training events that I've been on. It's been emphasised that information is confidential. That's not the case in local government law, and I don't think there's any conflict that's ever arisen in the board, because you'll be used to that information being public unless there is a reason under the Local Government Act to have discussion below the line, but that would be very rare, I think, in these situations. So in terms of confidential papers and sharing of information, we would be, advising and following the local government governance route there. And then I think there's an issue around your relationship with officers and how you get information shared between formal meetings so that you're updated and you understand what's happening and can decide whether something should be called into a formal meeting or not. So I think those are some of the issues that I think you probably need to be considering as you go through. But one of the key things to note, I think, is that those rules and that scheme and the appendices to the report that you've got before you do set out in quite a lot of detail what the purpose of the trust is, what you should be thinking about when you are making decisions, and how the charity should be managed. And if you want to change those rules, you can put forward proposed changes to Cabinet, and Cabinet does have the power to amend those rules if it sees fit, if it thinks it's in the best interest of the trust and the charity. So I shall just try to cease sharing my screen now. There we go. And answer any questions that you've got, and I can circulate those if they're of interest to members.
I've got a couple of questions, and then I'll move on to Councillor Slade, who's indicated she's got questions. First one is I mentioned the pavilion earlier, and you said you'll come on to that later. Perhaps you could enlighten on that. And my other question, you've just taken my prompt away, so I can't remember what it is. But whilst you're answering my pavilion question, I'll see if I can recollect it.
As looking at the plan that was...
What the other question is, so I actually will ask it because it might be relevant. You're working, I understand, on the whole of the Bournemouth Act. Will that have impact on what we're doing here? And if so, what impact do you think it might have?
Can I just answer that second question first while it's in my head? I think the piece of work that I've been asked to advise on relates to a review of the governance arrangements for the parks, in particular the 5 parks and the Lower Central Gardens Trust, and the sort of charities across, not just the 5 parks, but the sort of potential charitable land that's held both within Christchurch, other bits of Bournemouth and in Poole, and to look at how that's governed. I know that there's also a separate piece of work ongoing in relation to the Russell Coates Museum and the governance around that. And I think that there's external legal advice on that. I'm not involved in that, but there's going to be some proposals around potential amendments to the Act, the 1985 Act, to facilitate what may come out of that review. But so far as the 1985 Act is concerned, that insofar as how it relates to Lower Central Gardens Trust and the 5 parks, I don't think it's proposed to amend or change anything. So it shouldn't affect anything that you're doing. And to the pavilion, that does fall currently on the plans that we have from 1890, 1870, whatever. It does fall within Lower Central Gardens Trust land, as I understand it. But I'm undertaking undertaking a piece of work at the moment to double check what was actually contained within there was a sort of transaction, I think in 2010, prior to this scheme coming into effect in 2011, that it resulted in a land swap and certain part of land, potentially in peer approach, being transferred to the council, probably being within the trust, and some being transferred out. So I'd like to come back to the pavilion if that's possible and advise separately on that as to what the implications are, because it isn't ostensibly apparently part of the objects of the charity.
Very complicated. Thank you.
It is not. I wouldn't want to say anything about the pavilion, how it's managed, and the whole background to what happened in 2010-11 prior to the scheme coming into effect. without actually we are in the process of getting all of the archived files back and going through that in some detail at the moment. So I'd rather come back to that another time if that's okay, Chair.
Yeah, no problem at all. Councillor Slate, I think you've got some questions.
Yeah, thank you. It was around the conflicts of interest. And you were referencing about absenting ourselves from relevant things in council. Does that also include sort of things like, for example, parks catering? Because obviously the head shop cafes there and other facilities that are there, that if there was going to be votes on, you know, how we deal with our in-house versus out-house catering, does it go to that extent? And obviously what events that are taking place there, it feels like that's quite a restrictive obligation to take people off their wider role of parks.
Yeah, I think the way it would be interpreted is where there is a clear conflict that would be, if there were a conflict that would normally mean that there would be an appearance of, you know, impartiality or would sort of cause people outside to look in and say, well, how can you make that decision? Because clearly you're conflicted because you're also sitting on this committee, and for this committee you have to make a decision that's in the interest of the council rather than the trust. Now, then you would need to withdraw, but that would only arise if there's a clear conflict in the proposed decision. So
if you were Tanya, if for example we decided to stop catering in the parks and to allow people to come in with their mobile units, and rather than us have the hedgehog and the fox and all the rest of them, that would obviously be saving the council a whole load of money potentially. I realise we wouldn't have the income, but it might not be in the interests of the Lower Gardens Central Board. So in that case, we would be voting for what's in the best interest of the charity, even if it went against what the council's policy was in terms of how we're outsourcing our catering, for example.
Yeah, you would have to consider what decisions were coming forward to the trust board and whether those decisions, if you voted a certain way that you thought was in the interest of the charity, if that would then conflict maybe with something that you were aware that the council wanted to do, or to take forward as a wider policy, or that might not be in the council's best interests for whatever reason, because it might want to have X in the gardens to attract Y, linked to something else that was outside the gardens, then you would have to keep your trust hat on and vote with the trust. Now, that's what the rules say that you should do. There's also the option of walking out of both, or deciding that you don't want to sit on the trust board. But I think if you are a trust board member and you're making a decision within that context as a trust board member on the trust board that's coming to you as a trust board, then you have to always make that decision in the best interest of the charity. And there will be occasions, I don't know that they've arisen regularly at all. I don't think they have. That's my understanding. But there might be occasions where it would feel that there is a conflict, or would appear that there could be a conflict. And I think then it's actually about getting advice and talking it through and just being conscious of it.
Before I go to Councillor Barlow, do you have any more questions?
No, that's fine, thank you. I would just say that, and I'm not going to be political, Lawrence, so please don't take it that way, is that actually some of us didn't have a choice about being on this board. We were sort of put on the board. So to then say, well, walk away from the board, actually that puts us in a difficult position.
Yeah.
Because it would affect our record of attendance, and that therefore our, whereas we might feel that that's not an appropriate thing for us to do, but we've been put here, we haven't asked to be on the board.
I volunteered personally, but Councillor Bartlett.
Yes, thank you, Chair. It's an interesting point, the conflict, and it did occur to me when Tanya was giving an overview of what our role is to look at potential conflicts between what the council might want and what the interests of the trust are. and it straight away it brings to mind the use of or setting up a huge bar in the gardens. And is that in line with the interests of or the objectives of the trust to use it as a garden? Because a great big bar is it's pretty difficult to stretch to say it's so immediately. And then that goes on to other commercial enterprises going on within the space. Of course, you wrap that all up in terms of that means leisure, and their leisure within a garden setting. But I'm sure some people would have a view that actually some of the things that go on in the lower gardens are not in the best interest of maintaining the gardens in the way that the trust was originally set up to do. So I think there are some potential for conflicts there. And I'm not looking for any answers now. I just raise it as a view that I've sort of come to. Just a bit about the pavilion. Have we got anybody that can answer any financial questions? Because
yeah, we do have.
I do recall that in the accounts last year there was, I'm sure there was the maintenance costs of the pavilion were in there, which implies that actually that's all within the responsibility of the trust. But I might be wrong, so I just wanted to check if that is the case.
Yes, we do have a financial person on board. Can you answer that question?
Yes, excuse me. Yeah, good afternoon, Chair. Yes, Councillor, the accounts have been prepared with the maintenance of the pavilion. I've prepared them in a similar way for a number of years, and that maintenance charge has always been included as a cost to the Lower Gardens Trust.
Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, of course. We are looking at finance next, so if you want to come in now, that's fine. Okay. Any more from Councillor Bull? Do you have any questions for Tanya?
I don't think it's necessarily for Tanya, but it's just about the number of independent members on the board. It's quite low at the moment, so I don't know what the stipulation is for.
I think we were in the process of recruiting. I'll consult with Democratic Services after the meeting and perhaps come back to you on that. Yes, of course. Our independent member.
Hi, this is a question for Tanya, if you're still there.
Yep,
Yes,
yeah.
she is, yeah.
Yeah. So it's back to the pavilion. I find that the pavilion has been discussed and questions raised about it probably all the time I've been involved with this, with replies such as it's complicated or we'll be looking at it. But just fundamentally, I struggle with the concept that we have to sign off the accounts for this trust that includes large figures for the pavilion. Yet on the flip side, we seem to have no responsibility or involvement in the running of it as a trust board. Should I be worried?
The no's coming from a member of the BH Live board, so I'll leave Tanya to answer.
I don't want to come back with the same answer, which just seems really special. But and I don't think you should be worried. But I do think that you, as a board, should have a report on your roles and responsibilities as relate to the pavilion and the leasehold arrangements and the relationship with BH Live and how they interact. I agree. I think that needs to be fully clarified and put before you and recorded. And I think that should be done.
Is that something that you can
I can take that forward and
and perhaps bring to the next meeting for us? Okay, you happy with that? Yeah, thank you. Okay.
Chairman, could I just add something in response to Councillor Bartlett's statement very briefly, which is that, of course, there is a wide discretion as a trust board, so there will be obviously very many options to what could, I suppose, be still within the purposes and the objects of the charity. And different people will have different views as to, what serves the interests of the charity. And so long as you're thinking about the purposes of the charity, then that's fine. So there, I know with dealing with Kings Park, we've had endless debates about, you know, what's within the scope of the trust document over at Kings Park, and the advice was very clearly that there is a wide there's a wide discretion here for the council acting as trustee, and so long as it's thinking about the overall objects and the purposes of the charity, then if as a board or if as a council, in the sense of the park, it's acting within, I suppose, a range of reasonable kind of interpretations as to what might be in the purpose, then that's okay, so long as it's not totally irrational and unreasonably and obviously well outside of scope, then a lot of people will have different views, and that's fine, and that's why you have a board, and that's why you might need to vote. So I think that's quite important, just to say there is that discretion, and so some people will regard having a bar there to facilitate recreation and a cafe there within the gardens as being suitable and within the purposes of the trust. And that's certainly possible to argue that. And then there might be a scale or a scope that you decide that goes beyond that. So I think it's thinking through the range of options really, and you know, is it ancillary, and does it serve the core purpose, or does it become a purpose of its own and outweigh really the role of the garden, and it becomes too big? So it's all those sorts of questions you'd have to ask, but there is discretion there. It's not a black and white answer.
Thank you. I have to say I've often been in conflict as a ward councillor with Kings Park, but that's probably a subject of another meeting somewhere. Let's move on now, if we may, to finance. Thank you, Tanya. Appreciate the report. Mr. White, over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. I must confess I wasn't expecting to go through the accounts today. The accounts have been issued previously, and I think the implication is that questions would come to me and I could answer them outside of this forum. That was my understanding. Have I made a mistake?
Probably
Nikki?
not. It's been a long time since the last meeting. So,
Okay.
Is there anything you'd like to tell us about the accounts?
Well, they're still undergoing audit. Excuse me, Mr. Chairman. So they are subject to change until that audit is complete. Or
Does anybody have any questions of Mr. White? Yes, thank you, Councillor Bartlett.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I'm assuming then that as happened last year, that they will come back to the board for us to review and formally approve in January or February, or whatever it is.
Yes, the audit will need to, the accounts need to be concluded and filed with the Charities Commission by the 31st of January. So there will be a meeting hopefully late in January to sign them off. But as I say, at the moment, I mean, if there are any changes between the version of the accounts that you've received and as the audit progresses, then I can inform the board as we go through. So there is no, I don't want to surprise the board with any large changes. There'll be an explanation from myself for any changes if they were to occur between now and the end of January.
Yeah, I did have another thought. I'm not going to ask the question now. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. White. You can, yes, Andy.
Apologies, Chair. We haven't actually covered delegation authority, which is item 5 to 6 as well.
Well, actually, you're right, but I did understand that Mr. White wanted to leave early, okay, so I put it on next. But I should have said I'd reordered. So if nobody's got any more for Mr. White, then we'll leave it there for you on this occasion and let you go off to your next meeting.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, over to you, Andy.
Sorry. There was an element on one of the recommendations that we'd asked for to be considered was the delegation to officers of the day-to-day or business as usual activities within the gardens. It's normally general things about grounds maintenance, repairs, bin emptying, along those lines, and any significant change to the way the gardens is managed would normally be brought to the board, and that a good example would be something like the ice rink or something of that scale. And it was really whether you would reconfirm that delegated authority. I think it was to the Director of Environment and Destination and Culture on those key activities. So mainly low-level events, grounds maintenance, some of the lettings of some of the businesses and stuff. Is the lettings that we do, things like Street Food Corner on a day-to-day basis.
Well, before we vote on that, councillors, do you have any questions? Yes, Councillor Bartlett.
Yeah, I'm kind of wondering why it's a reaffirmation of what's already happening. Why is it necessary to reaffirm what the current policy is? Is there something that's changing as a result of this reaffirmation, or is it just need clarification that wasn't there before?
I think that the membership of the board has changed so many times since the original decision was to give those delegations. I think it would be useful, given the new structure, if you like, to reaffirm.
So was it not documented before? Is it not formal policy that sets out who's responsible for what?
I'm not entirely sure on that, because, as I say, we picked this up post Bournemouth Council.
Kate, did you want to come in on this? I see you've appeared on the screen.
Thank you, Chair. No, really just to echo Ian Portney's comments that, yeah, it's just in recognition of the changes that are in terms of board membership, and no, we can't source any legacy agreement. So it was really just to resecure what we believe is this sort of operational, as Andy's described, day-to-day changes that might need to take place in the lower gardens, that the board would be happy for that to continue, or whether indeed you're not and want more detailed reports coming through to the board before we can move ahead with decisions. But noting that that would have implications in terms of the running of potentially.
I've got 3 hands up. Let's go to our independent member first.
Thank you. With regard to the things that were spoken about earlier, and I think in the documents, the recommendations and the reaffirming of day-to-day duties, I don't see any harm in that. I think my issue is the ambiguity and perhaps vagueness. What is smaller, what is new, what is major, what is larger, what is important enough. And I would prefer if there was some kind of perhaps matrix which simplifies this and makes it easier to understand what should come before the board for signature, or what can be left as day-to-day business and operations for the council. So, for example, a list where on the left-hand side you have things like security, new events, new structures, temporary structures, access points, toilets, waste bins, and then across the top, does it require authority or a meeting to include the board or not? And then that kind of cuts away to a degree, I would imagine, some of the vagueness and lack of understanding from what I've read on this issue.
Ian, you want to come in?
Thank you, Chair. I think the business as usual events that we've talked about, so MT, for instance, stuff like that, they're quite numerous. So if we were to put those in a list, I think you've always, hopefully, you've got the solace that we would refer anything that we determined to be outside of the normal operations to the chair, and then the chair would give us instruction as to whether that should come back to the board. That's how we've done it previously.
I have no doubt and I have absolute faith in what the council do, but the reason we write contracts and agreements is in case they don't. And of course, on a day-to-day basis, there are lots of things that we see that are running tremendously smoothly. I'm sure there's going to be occasions where perhaps once we realise what's happening, we might, as you say, bring it to the chair. Then by the time we have a meeting, it's too late to do anything about it. So this is why I think perhaps not a list of what waste is removed by whom and when, but subjects that you can perhaps narrow down a bit so that there's a clear understanding of what should come before the board and what shouldn't.
Kate, you've got your hand up. Did you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's just what if it's useful for the board, would it be helpful if we come back when we're due to obviously to come back at the end of January, if we draw up almost a principle, so not an exhaustive list, but a principled list of those activities as just been outlined, really, that we could then give some further consideration to.
Yeah, that sounds to me as if it's a practical thing to do. Councillor Slate.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, it does seem a little strange that there is no scheme of delegation as such, you know, above which it would come back. I mean, if there was a contract, it would come back above 25,000, wouldn't it? So you'd have thought the idea, I think it's a bit vague saying large, small, normal, not normal. I just don't think that's appropriate governance. I suppose I'm a bit confused in terms of the council is the trustee, and we're just members of the board of the trustees. So in theory, the council could do what it likes anyway, because these guys are the council on a day-to-day basis. So that to me is very confused. Can I just ask a sort of side question around the budget side of it? So there's a section in here about summer response and winter response, and you know, having to put on extra resources that we know every summer we've got to have extra resources, but there is nothing in the council's budget for additional seasonal response next year. Cleaner, greener, safer, disappeared and pub smoke. So how can we, with our trust board hats on and wanting to keep it in good condition as a park, how can we be assured that it's going to be kept in that way? Because we know with our council hat on that in order to do that, it requires additional resource that's not budgeted. So how do we marry those two up? I'm a bit confused.
I'm not sure who can answer that. Kate?
I can only add that obviously we're still working through next year's budget setting process, so nothing has been determined as yet as to what additional resources we may or may not get as a result. But as I say, it's a live process for us.
Thank you. Councillor Bartlett.
Thank you. Yeah. The point about being more specific about who's responsible for what. There's an item on here which I think could be contentious. For example, which is assumed will go ahead, and that is the replanting policy for the flower beds in the lower gardens, which are famous. It's people have been coming to the town for years and years. Look forward to seeing them. But this is really quite a change in policy in the type of planting and the appearance that the lower gardens will have. Now, some people would regard that as a contentious issue, but of course, in the paper, it's a given. It's going to happen, to the scheme that's already been presented to us. I don't think we had any idea that this was likely to come forward, because I don't think we have a plan that's was telling us it was going to happen. But it's in there, so it's going to happen, and I suspect it could generate some debate. So I just raise that as an example of where I think there are some areas that would need some clarity, and this I think would be one of them that probably does need a bit more discussion. I'm not an expert in planting, or my wife does a garden, so I cut the grass.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat.
But I can just see that some people will take exception to the idea of putting perennials in and not having the traditional border plants planted, with a lovely. I mean, I do recall being a bit upset personally when the bank was tilted and it used to have a form of crest on it and things like that. It was absolutely gorgeous, and people used to really rave about that sort of thing. But that's not going to be happening in the future, according to this. I mean, I'm probably a bit out of date and a bit old-fashioned, maybe, but anyway, that's just the view, you know, and I think it's something that probably does need to be.
Well, you and I are of the same vintage, so I along with. Yeah, I would agree. I would agree with you. Kate, can you remark on that?
Me. The planting is something we're working on in terms of operational delivery across all of BCP's parks and open spaces where we are double. So it is a change in operating policy that we're looking to put into place as part of our response to our climate and ecological pledges as well in terms of sustainable planting and ecosystems and such, and also it does link to wider opportunities in terms of the nursery site ourselves that we operate that have previously provided those plants and what alternative income streams that we can build upon there.
Of course, we're guardians, if you like, of the historic gardens, and we seem to be losing the history element of it a little bit. But there we are. I think Councillor Bartlett and I have both made our thoughts known.
Apologies, Chair, it is on the item later on, but
yeah,
bearing in mind, I would say that Low Gardens was the Victorian garden, and actually the original planting was not major planting of the 60s that we saw. It was actually about the introduction of Victorian planting that was brought from around the world and then shown off in the Lower Garden, which is sort of where we're taking it back to. And actually, I think we've been quite famous for being initiative in the way we do our planting in this area. And I'm actually fully supportive of it this time. And I actually think it's an opportunity for us to do something different and be better than everybody else. And that's from the heart. And I used to clip the floral bedding in the Lower Gardens, so and do 3D bedding in the square as well. So I actually think there's an opportunity for us to go back to the original ideals of that Victorian garden as well. But that's, yeah.
Well, I can't go back to the Victorian times. Maybe Councillor Bartlett wants to comment.
I can't quite go back that far, but I mean, you know, when I saw I saw that in the Crescent area, you know, I think a number of the external flower beds are just going to be grassed over, so they will disappear. So, you know, and well, that's what it says in the report. So they'll be grassed over. You know, the ones that go around the perimeter at the back, around by the toilets and that, all, behind the trees, they're all going to be grassed over.
The plans that have been put in front of you are actually a draft set of plans, but it is about looking at moving away from that traditional annualised bedding, which is very labour intensive, uses a lot, both in the gardens and in the nursery where it has to be looked after a lot, but it's looking at a different form of planting that's in scale with the landscape, and we've got 2 landscape gardeners working on it. I just think I understand it's moving from that, what we've done from the past, moving forward, and we've known that as a Seven Sisters bed. It's been known that for a long time. I just think the perennial planting can have much impact, if not greater. I can't really.
So I guess the proof of the pudding is going to be in the eating, isn't it? Okay. Shall we now move on? Oh, sorry, Councillor Slade and Councillor Paul.
Thank you. While we're on that, I do feel your pain, Andy. I remember when Paul abandoned its bedding in Paul Park maybe 8-9 years ago. There was equal controversy, you know, about why we don't have the dolphin anymore and all that. You know, and some people do love it. I wonder whether there is an opportunity, though, to look at some, if you are returning to the Victorian values, and I am just having a quick skim read about this idea of, you know, bringing plants from abroad, the other elements of Victorian gardening which came in were about sculpture and water features. And I you know, I know water can be difficult. We have many a conversation, but is there not an opportunity to replace these expensive and difficult and not very environmentally friendly bedding plants with introducing sculpture through the lower gardens so that you actually have some reason to come there that's different? Sculpture by the Lakes has been the biggest draw of this part of the country. I mean, people come from all over. You know, we could reinvent, by going back to Victorian values, something very special, and potentially get, you know, people to sponsor them through legacy and whatever. I know it's random, but I just think that's the other element of Victoriana that we could
Sculpture by
reflect.
the lake is fantastic, but
Yeah, sculpture in the park.
part of the trust board is to bring in that innovation, if that's what you want.
Thank you. Councillor Bull, you wanted to come in.
Thank you, Chair. I think we've got plenty of water about the gardens, but
Yeah, some of it's intended.
yes, some of it's meant to be there. Yeah, it's. My question really is, how has the trust managed to make decisions in the last year or two when we've had such a little input from the board? You had decisions to make. How's that been done?
Kate?
I think our decisions, as we've referenced previously, have been very limited over the last couple of years. It's been business as usual events that have taken place, predominantly. John Weaver, correct me if I'm wrong. And other than that, it has just been restricted to maintenance. So there's been very little development work going into the park. Hence why the report's slightly larger this year. This time around, when we're looking at, actually, we know now we need to start to look at refurbishment work for the mini golf centre, etc. So we really have until now been ticking along as a result of LGR and coming in and reforming as a new park service, and then the COVID period really taking over a considerable amount of time where we were working with reduced workforce numbers, etc. So we are really now starting to look at moving forward, hence the changing embedding and some of the other events policies that are coming forward in the report as later items today.
Thank you very much.
Just come back to that bit. What we're having in the gardens is basically the same as we've had in the last couple of years. So the ice rink, for example, is the same as it was last year. Prior to that. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weaver. Right, I think that probably neatly brings us on to events. John Weaver.
Yeah, sorry, just trading the machine here. So as you see, I can first of all say that that the team that work in the lower gardens are very robust about what events they can put in there. I think Andy will say that we often try and push the envelope as far as we can, and they do kick back. So I think internally there is a good internal mechanism and audit that helps to help manage that. So but I do understand sort of the metrics thing, but I think internally that could change over time. So as I said, from our perspective, I'll take a slightly different perspective than others because that's what I've done in the past, and I think where we're going about it. From a town's perspective, the lower gardens is a key point, a key centre for animation and for vibrant communities within Bournemouth, because the topology of Bournemouth makes it that it's carved up like a propeller shape. And there is a lot of, and in terms of trying to develop economic sustainability and development of town centres that need it, events provide that catalyst. So it's always been a case that it is that space that actually brings people down. It also brings, as I would say, with things like Christmas Tree Wonderland and the ice rink and what comes with it, it also provides a vibrancy at times when actually the area is quiet and there are certain issues that can be associated with it. So it does help to actually develop that, provide a safer area, an animated area, which deters any issues that might be considered. And that's what events do. Now, nothing much else does that in terms of that intensity. The tension that we've had over the years has been to try and respect the fact it is a soft landscape and it can only take so much. And Andy and myself have worked for many years, decades, I think, to try and manage that balance. We put a policy in before BCP Council to make sure that we push all the what I call the heavy events towards the end of the year, and we kept the beginning of that springtime, and everything needs to establish itself as minimal as possible. So we will continue that policy, but at the same time, we've often talked about how we can make those grassed areas more resilient to put on events, not ice rink events, but things like, for example, Bournemouth wants, we've been trying to get a food and flower festival down here. into Bournemouth town centre, into the town centre, but the actual gardens are just too delicate to put that on. There are other events that could come in which are very family orientated, and actually have potential. And this sounds a bit extreme, but vintage fun fair, for example, just real old vintage fun fair. But of course, but it's right in terms of the style of use and the type of garden. But you know, the grounds don't actually allow that at the moment in time. So the report identifies ways in which we will continue to look at ways in which we can use that technology to be, and obviously come back to the board with your consideration about the future, how we can do that. And obviously there are funding issues associated with that, so we're not saying that's easy, but we'll continue looking at ways that we can make it more resilient and make sure those events are that can take place. So I don't think anything has changed in terms of our policy, in terms of today's report. It actually identifies a similar policy that we've been having for many years. It has identified the sort of the do's and don'ts in the framework that you see in the appendix, which gives those general principles. And we do, as I said, we do have considerable dialogue. We can't do anything as an events team in the lower gardens without Andy and his team to say yes or no, or sometimes deferring it when we had it in the past to the board. The big one, as Chairman will recognise, was with the ice rink, which was highly controversial and still remains so. And there's two ways of looking at that. You get an ice rink. An ice rink by itself, which is a great family atmosphere, it's very difficult to make that break even. And you might realise when we first introduced the town centre bid, paid tens of thousands of pounds to bring that in. And nowadays we don't. That isn't. It's now making a surplus, and that surplus is used to actually help finance the assets, like in Christmas Tree Wonderland. And you'll see what the accountant identifies all the income and all the expenditure associated with Christmas Tree Wonderland, and all that money is put into that. So it's very difficult to get that balance. And I understand the issues around bars and whether they be too big and too small, and that does need reviewing. That it doesn't turn into primarily focused around a bar, but it actually still has the principle of amenity, and we continue to do that. So that is where we're coming from in terms of an events policy for the lower gardens, and you'll see, as I said in the appendix, sort of the principles that we always have gone through in terms of determining whether events should be in there. And you'll see in the report as well the list of events which aren't that considerable, except obviously towards the end of the year, and which we try and make a balance. But everybody wants to use the lower gardens. I mean, the applications we have is highly intense, and the businesses say, can you do more in there, please? And but we have to say, well, we can only do so much to animate and provide a vibrant town centre. So it's that balance between that vibrant town centre that helps develop the commerce and providing that public amenity for the broader members of the public. And that's the balance that we try and strive.
Thank you. Any questions? No? Okay, we'll move on. Concessions and trading. Who wants to handle that? Andy?
Just on the concessions, really, I think Kate had already alluded to earlier that COVID actually had quite a big impact on the trading within the gardens for 2 years. I think that the safe thing to say at the moment is that trading seems to have returned to its previous levels. So the Westover kiosk, although that's mentioned here, one of the things mentioned here is that we had to extend the lease. We had to make decisions to extend that to the point that we can actually let it and confirm that a bit more. Lower Gardens mini golf, the figures that we're getting back from the surplus from that is in line with what we had 2 or 3 years ago. Hedgehog's kiosk, which is the first kiosk as you come into the gardens, is now in a surplus position that's similar to what we were getting with the lease value previous to that. Street food corner continues to grow, and the demand for that is still quite high, even though we've only got 2 pitches within the gardens. And we then got the Westover Art and Makeover Market, which I think you can expand on that one. But,
yeah, the art and makers market. We had a bit of a delay in terms of getting that up and running because of availability of equipment due to COVID, but that's now been resolved, and so we're looking forward to another successful season of that.
Thank you. Questions from board members? No? Okay. Yes, Roger.
For the makers market, we've discussed before that there have been ideas on the table about highly designed pods. Is there any way we can revisit that so it becomes a more aesthetically pleasing area that's sustainable in the future, maybe with some help from sponsorship of some sort?
We've certainly had it looked at. We've got indicative designs for it. As you say, it comes down largely to money. And so we're exploring things like SIL, the Community Infrastructure Levy, and other funding streams that might be able to support that. But as you would appreciate, there's quite a lot of demand on those funding avenues. So as yet, we're still determined as to when we'll be able to pull that together. But it's there. The aspiration is to deliver it. Yeah.
Okay. Get the agenda, and we seem to be at the end of the agenda. So future meeting dates, democratic services. Do we have any future dates yet, or are we waiting to hear how the accounts are coming along?
Thank you, Chair. As Stephen said, we are looking at a meeting towards the end of January. And I think there's a few dates that Stephen sent through that may be possible. So I'm just confirming those, obviously, make sure, obviously it's a busy time of year and everyone's looking at budgets. So obviously trying to get that date in. I think you said about bringing another item to that as well. So normally we'd look at that as a single item meeting, but we can work around that. And if Kate's team have got something else to bring, I think it would be good to do that at the same time rather than wait, because after that we're looking, I know when you met in sort of late March, April, if we could bring it back from April, I think that'd be beneficial, because obviously we start moving into purge at the end of March. Yeah. Everyone's busy, and obviously I appreciate from an elected member's point of view, your mind's probably going to be moving towards campaigning and other issues as well, and other end of sort of year things before the election. So if I can confirm a date with Stephen for the accounts and any other item you need bringing, and then look at mid-March, would that be doable? And I'm probably looking at Kate slightly on that one, to bring your sort of really end of items before election.
I think from our point of view, Nikki, sorry to interrupt, I think from our point of view, it would be very useful for us to meet as a board twice more. So if we aim to do that, and hopefully the meetings will be just as amiable as this one. Thank you.
Okay, I'll liaise and get some dates out. Obviously, as soon as you do know, if you can do those dates, please let me know. I know things do change near time, but if I can get those out, we can get those established well before Christmas.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so
I think Kate wanted to come in, Chairman.
Kate, you wanted to come in, yeah.
If that's okay, Chair, in terms of just the item for the January, if it's possible, in terms of seeking clarification and agreement on the level of delegations, I think it would be helpful if I could bring that forward to the January meeting, so that the team going forward to the summer are really clear on those lines. But I'm happy to circulate something in draft form ahead of the meeting, so that it doesn't take up. Hopefully, it's just a sign-off period at the actual meeting, if that's agreeable with board members.
Dot the I's and cross the T's. Yep. Okay. Thank you.
We'll get that
acceptable to everybody? Yep. That's fine. Thank you. Okay. So with no other business, has anybody got any other business to report? No. I'll draw the meeting to a close at 3:10. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.